The service entrance is behind the topiary. Darling, this floor is reserved for people who actually own the ink on their checks, not the ones who just scrub the floors. Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne International, didn't even grant Elara the courtesy of eye contact. He sat at the center of the elite table, his hands completely empty of any tablets or devices. He adjusted his charcoal silk tie with a slow, predatory arrogance that signaled to the 20 people surrounding him that the entertainment had begun. Julian, honestly, Beatrice laughed, her voice carrying across the marble floor like shattering glass. She adjusted a triple strand of South Sea pearls, her eyes raking over Elara's emerald silk gown with pure contempt. Why are you being so formal? Just tell her the cleaner's wanted sign was for the 5 a.m. shift. Though, looking at that dress, maybe she's here to audition as a Christmas tree for the lobby. The table erupted in a wave of sharp, jagged laughter. A man in a gold-trimmed vest leaned back, swirling a glass of $1,000 cognac. I'll give her $50 if she can tell us what a dividend is. Actually, make it 20. I don't want to overinvest in the help. Does your agency know you've wandered away from the mop bucket? Or are you hoping to find a rich husband to pay for that rental dress? Elara stood her ground. She didn't flinch and she didn't reach for a phone. Her quiet authority filled the space between her and Julian like an invisible wall. Mr. Thorne, Elara said, her voice a low, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. Your guests have a future in stand-up comedy, which is fortunate because after tonight, none of them will have a future in finance. I'm here for the $6.8 billion merger. We are exactly 5 minutes behind schedule, and my patience is significantly more expensive than your ego. The laughter stopped instantly, replaced by a cold, suffocating silence. Julian's face flushed a mottled, ugly crimson. He stood up with such violent force his chair screeched against the floor, a sound that made the witnesses in the background jump. He invaded Elara's space, his expensive cologne acting as a physical weight. Apex Holdings? Julian barked, his voice a jagged edge of contempt. You think because you walked through the front door of my gala that you're a player in my league? You're a footnote, a diversity statistic that some PR firm dreamt up to make my board look inclusive. I'm going to personally fire the security team for letting this experiment ruin my evening. You aren't here for a merger. You're here because you're a trespasser. In a raw, unposed moment of physical aggression, Julian reached out. His hand gripped Elara's shoulder, and he shoved her back toward the gold leaf pillar. Thanks for the support. We couldn't do this without you. Subscribe for free to help us keep bringing you more stories. Where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments. Now, back to the story. Get out. He hissed, the vein in his temple throbbing. Before I have you escorted out in handcuffs and make sure you never see the inside of a courtroom, let alone a boardroom. You don't belong in a room with mahogany walls, and you certainly don't belong at my table. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of and leave the billion-dollar deals to the men who actually own the ink. The social jury leaned in, their faces twisted with elitist glee. Finally, Beatrice whispered loud enough for the room to hear. Someone put the help back in their place. Security should charge her for the air she's wasted. Elara straightened her gown with a slow, deliberate movement. She looked at the spot on her shoulder where his hand had been, then looked Julian directly in the eyes. Her gaze was surgical. You've spent your life building a fortress of mahogany, Julian, she whispered, the coldness in her voice seemingly dimming the lights of the crystal chandelier above. But you forgot one very important detail. I'm the one who owns the forest. You should have checked the signature on the wire transfer this morning. You think you're the architect of this deal? Julian, you're just the tenant. And I just served your eviction notice. She didn't move. She didn't shout. She simply stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the judging eyes of 20 elites, as the massive mahogany doors at the far end of the ballroom began to groan open. The massive mahogany doors at the far end of the ballroom didn't just open. They groaned under the weight of an era ending. A procession of 6 men in identical charcoal suits marched into the light of the crystal chandelier, their footfalls synchronized against the marble like a funeral march. At the front was Arthur Sterling, the most feared corporate litigator in the hemisphere, carrying a single leather-bound folder. He didn't look at Julian. He didn't look at the mocking social jury. He walked straight to Elara, stopped exactly 3 paces away, and bowed his head in a display of absolute submission that sucked the oxygen out of the room. "Madam Chair," Arthur's voice boomed, cutting through the last lingering giggles of Beatrice and her inner circle. "The final audit of Thorne International is complete. The hostile takeover was finalized at 6 p.m. tonight. You now hold 54% of the voting shares, effectively dissolving the previous board. You are in full unilateral control of every asset, every subsidiary, and every contract bearing the Thorne name." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Julian Thorne's hand, still raised from the shove, began to tremble. His face, once a mottled red of arrogant anger, drained of color until it was the shade of wet ash. He looked at Arthur, then back at Elara, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. "Arthur, what is this theater?" Julian finally managed to wheeze, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "This woman is a trespasser. I'm the CEO. I'm the one signing the $6.8 billion Apex merger. I brought you here to finalize my legacy." "Julian, be quiet," Arthur said, his voice dripping with a professional pity that was more insulting than a slap. "You aren't signing anything. You've been selling off staggered shares through shell companies for 3 years to cover your mounting losses in the Macau high roller suites. You thought you were being discreet. You didn't realize that Apex Holdings was the one buying every single scrap of paper you dropped. They didn't come here to merge with you, Julian. They came here to foreclose on you. And you just physically assaulted the woman who signed your death warrant." Elara stepped out from the shadow of the gold leaf pillar, the emerald silk of her gown shimmering like a sharpened blade under the tiered chandelier. She walked toward the table where the social jury sat. The 20 elites who had been laughing moments ago were now frozen in masks of pure, unadulterated terror. Beatrice tried to hide her triple-strand pearls behind a silk napkin, her eyes darting toward the exit like a trapped animal.
"You were so worried about the help being in the room, Julian," Elara said, her voice a low, lethal hum that vibrated the crystal stems on the table. "But the only one here who's currently unemployed is you. Arthur, trigger the keyman morality clause immediately. Mr. Thorne just committed a physical assault in front of 20 high-profile witnesses and a dozen high-definition security cameras. That is a Tier 1 breach of his conduct agreement. His stock options? Voided. His $50 million severance? Non-existent. His reputation? Liquidated. You can't do this." Julian roared, though it sounded more like a desperate whimper as he looked around the room for an ally. He turned to the man in the gold-trimmed vest, the one who had offered $20 to see Elara spell acquisition. "Robert, tell her. We've been partners for 15 years. Stand up for the integrity of the board." Robert didn't even look up from his plate of cooling wagyu. He deliberately slid his chair 6 inches away from Julian, effectively erasing 15 years of history in a single cold movement. "I don't know this man, Madam Chair," Robert said, his voice oily and eager to please the new power. "I was just telling Beatrice how appalled I was by his barbaric behavior. It's simply not the standard we expect at Apex." The social jury, sensing the shift in the wind, turned on Julian like a pack of starved wolves. "He always did have a streak of instability," Beatrice chimed in, her voice now aimed directly at Elara's favor. "We were all so horrified when he shoved you, dear. Truly, it was an act of a desperate man. We are so relieved you're here to bring some elegance back to the firm." Elara didn't grant them the mercy of a smile. "Save your breath, Beatrice. Arthur, I want the names of everyone at this table who found the Christmas tree joke entertaining. Every one of their firm's contracts with our new subsidiary is to be flagged for immediate review and termination by 9 a.m. Monday. I don't build $6.8 billion empires with people who find entertainment in the disrespect of my office." The color drained from the faces of the 20 elites. The laughter that had filled the ballroom was replaced by the hollow sound of people realizing their fortunes had just vanished because of a mean-spirited joke. Elara turned back to Julian, who was now slumped against the mahogany table, looking small and broken beneath the weight of the chandelier. "You told me to leave the billion-dollar deals to the men who own the ink. Well, Julian, it turns out I don't just own the ink. I own the paper, the pen, the desk you're leaning on, and the very air you're breathing in this room. Security, please escort Mr. Thorne to the service entrance. As he so eloquently put it, that's where his peers are waiting. As two security guards in charcoal suits gripped Julian's arms to drag him away, Elara turned to the remaining guests. Her quiet authority was final. This gala is over, and so is the Thorne name. Clear the room. I have janitors coming in to handle the trash, and I'd hate for you to get in their way. She stood alone in the center of the marble floor, the undisputed owner of a $6.8 billion future, while the man who mocked her was hauled out the back door into the cold night.